Welcome. I'd like to call this finance meeting to order. The first item we have is assignment for request for council action. We have several for the finance, 24-223 repay advance, fund advance, 24-224 rollover advances, 24-225 budget amendments, 24-226 dispatch and communication agreement with Medina Hospital Life Support Team, 24-227 dispatch and communications agreement with Medina Township, 24-228 dispatch and communications agreement with Montville Township, and 24-229 RFP, RFQs, permitting and code enforcement software, community development, and 24-230 job creation grant for Famous Supply. We have 24-223. We have repay advances for the TIF. Keith?
Thank you, Mr. President. For those not aware, the TIF is a tax increment financing district. This has to do with the parking deck out here. We have not received a whole lot of money yet because the district that it services, we've only had the one property developed, but we're working on it and we're just rolling it over year to year.
All right, how much, do we have in there, how much got paid off? Or I guess a little got paid off.
Yeah, because it's $3,152,000 and then we're only rolling $3,125,000, so we're paying off about $25,000. Obviously, at that rate, it's going to take a really long time to pay it off, but
Yeah.
it isn't expected to increase as more of that property gets developed.
Sure, understood. Any questions?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rose?
thank you. Keith, this is part of the keeping the auditor happy with the way we're rolling it.
Well, yes, we have to roll advances annually, or else the auditors, we have to demonstrate that council still intends to ultimately repay this. And they accept rolling it over annually as that demonstration. So this and the next one, we're rolling these over annually to show that, yes, we do intend to repay them. And then that's why we have to do this every year.
Okay, thank you.
All right, you get to do the motion now.
Move to approve?
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. 24-224 rollover outstanding advances.
This is the rest of them, and these are just grants that have gone beyond a year and so on. And then that's at least, the airport is a little bit different, but most of them are just grants that are gone beyond a year, so we're just rolling them.
Any questions?
Move to approve?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. 24-225, we have 2024-54. Keith?
This is a pretty extensive adjustment, but it's to cover all these advances that you just voted on in the last two.
Questions?
Move to approve?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. 24-56. Keith? This is park maintenance.
This is, yeah, you want to cover it?
This is revenue from ice cream sales at Fred Greenwood Park.
Oh,
From our lemonade stand.
any questions?
Move to approve?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. 24-57. This is economic development advertising. I guess $3,000, Kimberly, for,
Yes, so we partner with Main Street Community Design Committee, the Chamber of Commerce, in this year, a new one, Convention and Visitor Bureau. And so those are contributions to us to help offset the costs of the printing for our visitor guide. So we front the money and then out of our budget, and then this is to reimburse us.
any questions?
Move to approve?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. 24-226, dispatch and communications service agreement with Medina Hospital and Life Support Team. Lieutenant Mark, are you going to handle the next three? Or who's handling them?
I'll handle the next three.
Okay,
This
you're
is
on.
This is a 3-year renewal contract to provide dispatch services to the life support.
Everything's about the same, I would imagine?
Correct, they pay 33% of our total operational cost of the dispatch center.
And Mr. Huber, since it's the same agreement, I assume everything's fine with you?
It is.
All right, anybody have any questions?
Move to approve?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. 24-227, this is the dispatch and communications service agreement with Medina Township. Lieutenant?
This is also a 3-year renewal for dispatch services that we provide Medina Township, and that is $78,000 a year they pay us.
Any questions?
Move to approve?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. And then finally, the 24-228, the dispatch and communication service agreement with Montville Township.
This is also a 3-year renewal for dispatch services for Montville Township, and they pay us $78,000 a year for that.
Okay, any questions?
Move to approve?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Thank you. 24-229, an RFP and RFQ for permitting and code enforcement software for Community Development Department. Andrew?
Yes, this is a request to solicit requests for proposals and qualifications for a new development department, permitting and code enforcement software. New software is proposed as our current software does not offer online permit submittal, adequate storage, workflow management, or document generation that is workable. This was discussed during the Development Department budget hearing in September. So our plan here is to put out the requests in the fall and then make a selection early next year. Thank you.
Questions?
Thank you. This software that you're looking for, are you going to work to play nicely with Keith's information, Keith's finance work, so that, like, say, if somebody applies for a permit, it automatically goes to him and billing is done? They don't have to run all over the place? They can take care of it that way? If that's possible for you, Keith?
Yeah, most of these systems offer online payment, so that's something we'd have to work with finance to make sure they're okay with it, but that's typically offered.
Okay, all right. So, because one stop would be great. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? If you guys recall, we did talk about this, and it should be a benefit as far as making things a lot easier and function better throughout the department, so.
Move to approve?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. There's one other item to be added to the agenda that you may not have on there. It's a 24-230, it's a job creation grant from Famous Supply. Kimberly?
Thank you, Mr. President. This request is for the mayor to enter into a job creation grant agreement with the Famous Supply Company for the purpose of constructing a new warehouse facility located at 160 Commerce Drive. This will be a new branch of their future operation. Total investment is $3.8 million for the project, and they have committed to creating 6 new full-time positions with new payroll of $423,500 to the city of Medina annually. This agreement will provide Famous Supply Company with a grant up to 40% of new payroll taxes to the city of Medina for a 3-year term. I did give it to Mr. Huber. He has reviewed it and approved it. And as a reminder to council and the public, the grant payments are funded through non-income tax generated revenue. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions on that?
Move to approve?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. All right, well, that's the finance meeting. That was pretty quick. Anybody have anything else to add to finance before we move on to talk about our 5-year budget and the income tax? All right, if hearing nothing, we'll go to the 5-year budget approval and the review and the income tax ordinance. If you recall, we did the whole process, went through the 5-year budget. It was updated. I think Keith has information on that. Everybody should have had that big packet you could have went through to see what the final budget is. So Keith?
Couple things. First of all, our health insurance, as it turns out, is going to be up a little bit because the health insurance is locked in, but the dental's going up and some of the other stuff that we pay on it. It's not enough to where it's a 911, we have to make a change right now. So my recommendation is we just pass the budget as is, and then if we need to increase it to cover those increases, we can do it next year, because it's not huge, because the dental isn't that big of a percentage of what we're paying anyway, so it's not that big of a deal, but it is going to be a little bit higher than it was this year because that portion is going up. So I wanted to put that out there before we move on. As for the rest of it, I sent you a pretty extensive email with a whole lot of information that if you're having trouble sleeping, that was probably helpful for you. But there's a lot of information there. The short version is things are going pretty well, especially, the economy's been doing really well. Our income tax collections have been very strong. And then on top of that, since COVID, the feds have been spending a great deal of money, a lot of which has come to us in the form of grants that we've gotten from the federal government. So between those two things, we're doing very well. I did ask on the income tax allocation that we consider putting a little more in the capital. The reason that I made that recommendation is because by the time we get done paying for this court project, we're gonna be pretty tapped out in our capital funds, so I'd like to refill those so we have money available for projects. And we have the money right now in the general fund to be able to take that hit without an issue. As far as the unanticipated capital, I know this is kind of a long-running thing. We have had experiences here before, you know, it sounds kind of like it's unlikely, but it's not when you're as big as we are. You know, when Nino's in my first summer here, we came in after July 4th and 3 of our garbage trucks had burned up. We did have, long before any of us were here, but we did have a, well, you might have been here for that, when a customer at the court, customer, I say. You weren't here then? Okay. That was a long time ago, but we had a customer at the court who was apparently angry with the resolution of his issue and tossed a match on the court. So, I mean, things like this do happen. That's why I'd like to fill that in a little bit. But I had those things, and then I gave you a lot of information. I don't want to sit here and read it to you. If you have any questions, I'm here, so.
Well, let's just ask the question. The first one is on the general fund. Right now, it's 31.5% of the income tax allocation. And if we recall the income tax that we are able to generate, that will be allocated amongst the funds, if I remember correctly, the total was 20 million. You deduct the 0.25%, I think it was, for the 108 account, Pat's favorite account. It leaves us with what, about 16 million or so, 15, 16?
Right, and then we pay Rita too before we start allocating out.
So we've got about 15 million to be safe. If we say roughly around $15 million that is allocated amongst the other various funds. So 30% of 15 million, we get about $5 million or something like that into the general fund a year. And what are we at now? Do you have that number, the balance of that? And
So, yeah, the general fund, well, it's the one where I give you with, not including advances, because the numbers are kind of skewed here, because the advances vary, but we closed 2023 with 3.6 million in there. And then we also had, and I put it in the email, another 3.6 million on top of that in what's called interfund receivable, which is those are advances that we'd made that hadn't been repaid yet. So the cash balance was 3.6, but it's really 7.2 because the rest of that is coming back. And that is, if you look at the annual expenditures for 23, it looks like we spent $15 million, but again, that includes almost $7 million in advances. So the actual recurring ongoing expenditures in the fund are like 8. So when we have $7.5 million in cash, it means essentially we've got close to a year's worth of cash on hand. That's where we're at in the general fund.
And then we have, I mean, the only other large account, of course, is the police department. They get about 6.5 million a year currently, I think, allocated to them. And their budget's not quite that yet, so they're getting more money than they spend in that account. So, I mean, really the two accounts to look at, and Keith is correct, we need to probably add a little bit more to the 301 account because it only gets 1.5%, which is, what's that, about $200,000? 1% will be $150,000.
Yeah, it's a little over like
So
two
we
and a
probably have
quarter.
to do a little bit more, because as we know, the court project's gonna be more expensive than that. So the question is, how do you wanna reallocate this? And Keith is correct about the unanticipated capital, but I don't know, with the allocation here, if we can allocate any more to that, because we did allocate a little bit more to that last time, just to keep it up. And the balance on that is, we just took a little bit out of it. It's still around $1 million.
Right, it's been there for quite a while, because we got to $1 million and then we quit putting money in it, and for about 11 years, it just sat at about $1 million. And then we started a couple years ago putting a little bit more in there.
Right, so, I mean, what are people's thoughts of how to, again, we have to make these modifications every year to make sure that we have stability amongst the funds, and, we have the money on the projects that we're going towards to make sure the costs are covered, and we're building up balances in these funds so they're not all tapped out. So we have a better picture of the city's financial well-being across all the funds.
So I do have a question, Keith. 0.25% would be like 50 grand then?
Let's see, 1% is about 150. So a quarter is going to be a quarter of that, so it's a little less than 50, but
Okay.
getting towards there.
So if
And that's ballpark, obviously, but yeah.
And I don't know how much that you're recommending that we would increase it, or if you have a recommendation. but a 1/4% taken from every other allocation, so it'd be a real small, minute.
I don't know if you could take it from all of them, because remember, some of these accounts, they already have,
I'm not saying taking a 1/4% from everyone.
Oh.
I'm saying a 1/4% total,
no, I don't think that's enough.
you know.
I was thinking at least 1% needs to go to the general purpose capital, which would be 150,000 a year, at
What-
least for a couple years.
We're putting 3.5 in general purpose capital.
Oh, right now it's
Well,
three and a
what
half?
about
Right,
the
you're
you
looking
mean
at, on that ordinance,
unanticipated?
you're looking at the
Oh.
prior to 24. If you go back to page 3, which is the 24 allocation, it's 3.5 there. And then the unanticipated, I'm looking for that one, is 1.5.
1.5 at J.
So those two together are 5. So my recommendation
yeah,
was
look
to
at the
take
wrong-
1.5 from
Right.
general, and then those two combined would be 6.5, and then I have it as a sliding scale based on the balance of unanticipated.
What's the balance on the unanticipated again, please?
It's a little over $1 million.
A little bit, you know, with inflation going on, should we bring that up to about 2?
I guess that's a good question. We just modified that because it was at 1,
Right.
if you remember, so we just increased it to 1.5, which, again, that's pretty good. You're still putting in, 1% is 150,000, so you're putting in over 200,000 in unanticipated capital. I don't know if we really need to change that.
It was
Well,
at a half, and we raised it to 1.5.
Right. Oh, yes, so 1.
Yeah, half, and we added 1 to it
So we added.
last year.
Yeah, we had 150,000. So for a couple of years, I don't think we need to do anything with unanticipated capital, because that's gonna build up over 2 years, that's 300,000.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking in terms of the way inflation has been going, if we shouldn't work a little bit faster to get our balance to about 2 million, just so we have a better cushion, and then we can back it off.
Well, I get what you're saying, but I'd rather put more money towards the capital fund, which is, correct, I was looking at the wrong line, 3.5%, because that's the account that we're gonna need to spend money now on. And what's the balance on 301? I think it's like 4 million, 4.5? Is that right?
I'm getting it, give me a second. It's on one of these sheets that I've got here.
Because I know the judge has 4.2 million in his,
Okay.
special projects fund.
And we don't want to use all of this up for just one project.
Well, it's gonna go, because that certain project is gonna be like over 9 million, so.
Okay, so at the end of '23, it was 4,077,000. By the end of '24, we expect to be 4.3, 4.4 in that neighborhood, and then we're gonna spend the bulk of that on the court project,
Right.
which is why, that's really why I'd come with this, we should put a little money in there. Because for the city as a whole, if something comes available, like we had the step property over here by the park, you know, same thing, if you have a property that's adjacent to a park or something like that that we'd like to buy, we want to have the ability to do that.
So I would say personally, either 1% or 1.5% from somewhere else to put it in the general purpose capital, at least for a few years, so that we could build that back up. So that'll make it either, you know, get it to, if you put 1.5%, it's 5%, which would be 300,000 a year, which I think would be pretty good for a few years.
But I would just hope that we could spread it out for every department that could afford to have it spread out.
Right, I don't know if there's
wanna-
many departments that can, and I guess that's the question. When you look at it, you tell me which department can do that.
Yeah,
Well,
I don't know.
well, Keith is saying that we could afford the 1.5 for the next 3-4 years out of the general fund without affecting any of the other departments.
Right.
If we can afford it, then I would
And-
recommend.
And the other thing is, the nice thing about putting it in a capital fund is if you take part of the income tax and put it in an operating fund, that operating department is gonna get used to spending it, and then if you need it back, it's gonna be hard to get it.
Right.
If you take this and put it in the capital fund, and then, okay, 3 years from now, we're in a recession, we're tight, we need this money back, you can always pull it back from the capital fund, because they're not gonna have operating expenditures that are utilizing it.
So that'll be about, 1.5 is about, well, if 1 is.
2.25.
2.25, it'd be 225,000. So it'll be 5%, which a total of 5% will be 300,000 a year, total, that it goes in there, right? So.
Right.
And if we do that for a few years, in 3 years, it'd almost be 1 million. Hopefully the income tax
no,
increases
that's seven.
some more, and we're at 1 million.
No, that's
John,
750
that'd be more
total.
like 750.
Wait,
5 times 150.
times
150.
Oh, yeah, 150, sorry. So, I am better, but I don't know what I was thinking. 5%.
Wishful thinking.
Because 5% of 10 million is 500,000, you're right. So the question is, you know, that'll build up quickly, but we're probably gonna use most of it for the court. So if we wanna do any other capital projects in the city, you're gonna have to have some money in there.
But.
And we do have some debt service coming out of that fund too. That's what those planned expenditures are in there.
So, I mean, I agree. I mean, we could do 1.5 this year and see how it looks next year, because once the payments start coming off with the court, we could see how that's doing. Because if you remember correctly, at some point, we were hopeful that the special projects fund would then take over payment of the lease payments, because the special projects fund covers all jurisdictions that the court serves, rather than the city just paying for the lease payments
Right.
for the court, when the city is not the only, jurisdiction using the court. It didn't make a lot of sense for us to carry the bill on that, when you could use all the jurisdictions to help pay for that. But we need to pay for the construction or the renovation of it, and we know that's gonna be, again, don't wanna get on the horse here, but it was 7.8 million if we would've went with the county, but we couldn't. Now it's gonna be over 9 million. So it's gonna cost us at least another $1.5 million because we're going over there.
And you say we can take this out of the general fund and
Yep.
not, obviously not impact any department.
Right, when you look at general fund, so, it's the cash not including advances. We've run surpluses, again, not including advances. So for 23, our surplus was 3.6. 22, it was $1.25 million. 21, it was about $250,000. 20, it was $750,000. So, I mean, we've been running substantial surpluses in here for a number of years. The last time we ran a deficit in the general fund, not including advances, was, I'm trying to eyeball across, it looks like it was 16. So we've
16?
2016, right. So we've run surpluses each year since then, and those have been increasing these last couple of years as revenues have been good and the grants. So, yeah, for the time being, we can take this out. I'm a little hesitant to commit to 3 or 4 years, because I don't know what the economy is gonna look like 12 months from now. But yeah, I mean, as it stands right now, we can definitely afford this right now.
And remember, we passed an ordinance that says we're gonna keep a minimum balance of 25%.
Right.
And I don't know what the balance is now. I mean, do you have a rough estimate of what our percentage is?
4 million, so yeah.
So we're at 7 points, so we're about,
We're over the-
And the 4 million doesn't include all the advance money that's coming back. So if you include that, we're at 7, and then you're at
more
most
than
of a
that,
year.
right. So we're doing fine with that.
Right.
So right now, we're good to do what you're
Right.
suggesting, Mayor. If we have to revisit it next year, we can.
Yeah, I mean, if we get into a deep recession next year, we're gonna be back saying, hey, we need to stop doing this.
Right.
But, I mean, that's, nobody has a crystal ball. We don't know where we're gonna be in 12 months, and we'll,
I mean, the only other thing that, I always look at, from the overall budget, and you guys always hate when I talk about this, at Lieutenant's like, at the police department, right? They have $10 million, right?
Right.
And they're putting more money in than they're spending every year. So they still have $10 million. So they have almost 2 years of money saved up for operations. So if there is something that happened, you could lower their 40%, 0.5% or whatever, and it still won't have a zero impact on the police department.
Right. And we could do that if we have to.
Right.
We have to.
No, I'm just saying,
If you-
there's other things, like the other departments are a little tighter, right?
Sure.
So you can't, the other
Ed's
departments
not
don't have as
even
much
here
of
to
a balance.
defend himself.
no, but I will point out, if you look at the very bottom of the cash report, and I know it's like 15 pages long, but if you go to the last page, I have a cash report for the city as a whole. And because of the way things have gone in the last few years, if you go back, not all that many years, about 5 years ago, our cash balance for the city as a whole was around $40 million. And at the end of 23, it was about 75. We're gonna close 24 with around $80 million in cash. Now, our budget can be that high, but that includes things that are double counted, like payroll's all double counted and all those advances moved around. If you actually look at the recurring expenditures, our budget's like 40.
Yeah.
So we're at $80 million, we're carrying close to 2 years' worth of cash on hand, which is obviously significant. And that's, again, that's come up over the last 4 or 5 years because revenues have come up,
Well, that's what we
really
want,
6
because we
when
could
revenues
weather the
started going up.
storm. When everybody else, all the other cities are cutting and stuff, we have enough money saved that we don't have to worry about these issues.
And we have gotten some substantial savings in the past because of that. I mean, I know one example we've talked about a few times, like when we built the building at the airport, it was in a recession, And we got prices that were way lower than what Pat was estimating, because when you get, construction tends to be hyper cyclical. So if you're doing construction when nobody else is, you get really good deals. You know,
But you gotta have the money to do it.
you gotta have the money to do it, you know, and I know we've had even some grant projects, and this is important for cash on hand too, so everybody understands this. You know, sometimes NOACA gets to the end of the year and they've got a little bit of money left over, and you've gotta have the match available, or you can't even apply. You know, I mean, you get to the end of the year and it might not be NOACA, but one of these agencies has a certain amount of grant funds left over, and they'll come out and say, hey, we've got this grant available, but you've gotta be able to cough up your local match. And if you've got it, you can apply, and you might get that. If you don't have it, you're not even in that discussion.
Understood.
And remember, we're not even talking about the 108 account, because Pat gets that separately. So that's, you know, that's even outside of this, what we're talking about. So, yeah, I mean, I think 1.5 is fine. You know, I think that we need to make sure that there's an ample amount of capital money for other projects, because the court project's not the only one. There could be another capital one, and we won't have any money saved up in there. So we just have to start figuring out to get a balance of that. Just like Keith's on the unanticipated capital, you know, he wants 2 million, or you brought up 2 million. We're gonna have at least 2 million in the.
Paul
general
wants
purpose.
2. I think that should be 4. If you look at when it was set to be $1 million back in '98, and
Yeah,
you
we
look at
need
where
4
we are
vice
now,
versa.
and then the proposal I made, it would take 15 years to get it to $4 million. So you're talking 98 to like 2040, going up by 4 times, and that's reasonable given inflation, in my view.
I agree with you, the balance of the account, but if you look at our overall health of the city, we have that money for.
We do have the money, it's just not in that particular account, so
Right.
you're right. I mean, and if the money were in the regular capital fund, I mean, we could take it from there if we had garbage
Yes.
trucks burn up in a fire, or if we showed
So
up
I'd
on
rather
Monday
have that
morning.
build up too, to give us some flexibility, but you're correct, we need to have some balance in that other account too. And the goal would be to get these balances healthy enough where any kind of thing that happens, like COVID happened, it really didn't affect us. We have money available to weather the storm, and there's no layoffs, right? So, Kimberly?
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a question. So at the Economic Development Committee, this was I don't know, maybe a year ago, we talked about the multipurpose trail study, the connectivity study, which we completed. But if you remember, we talked about how were we going to fund the trail connections, and a lot of that is grants, and I can't remember which fund you said we were going to take the money out of. So is that the general purpose capital, or which one was that?
It would be that one, and it could also be we have money left over sometimes, not a lot, in general administration, which is general fund. So there's money available in both those accounts, but the question is, you're correct. We're not just gonna spend the money to do that. We're gonna match a grant.
Right.
Because that doesn't seem responsible just to spend all the money on a trail. But if there's a grant that pays a substantial portion of it, it makes sense to do it. I mean,
So the thought process when we did the study was that we were gonna try to do, you know, one project maybe a year or every other year. I don't know how feasible that is internally, but the whole idea was to chase down grants,
Yes.
which then they need probably 20 or 25% matching.
Yes.
And you said we would have to increase one of those funds, and I couldn't remember the name of it, so I just want to make sure that
I
that,
think it was general purpose capital, because that's where that
Okay.
money would probably come from.
okay.
And that's what we're gonna increase. But remember, there's a huge project coming out of there, and he just mentioned we only have 4,077,000 in there now. And if we bring 750,000 in a year, even when the core project's done in, you know, if a year or 2 years, that's gonna almost be zero again.
I know that's my concern, that's why I'm bringing it up, because I don't want you to forget about the trail project, which we talked about in the Economic Development Committee. So how do we have some funding in there for these, you know?
I mean,
For the
like I said,
match.
I'm a little more aggressive with putting the money in the general purpose capital. I would do 1.5 from general and 1/2 from the police to make it 2, just for a few years to get that money in there to do these projects, but that's up to you guys. But that would be because that way, nobody's losing any money, right? You don't wanna impact any department, but you wanna make sure there's money available to complete the court project, have money for other capital things, specifically part of the trails, and how do you do that? So I don't know. I mean, what do you think about that, Mayor?
Yeah, I don't, you say you're not gonna impact the department, but if you're taking it from the PD, you are impacting the department. I mean, it's money that's coming out of there. I do understand they have quite a reserve. The whole thought process was that they'd be able to operate in case something, God forbid, happened like it did in the early 2000s. And I was the chief then when we laid off 25% of the staff, 11 of 42 people. And we never wanted to live through that again, and that's why they have substantial reserves, as well as I know the chief has interest in either an expansion of the building or a different police facility. So the fact that we don't need it now, if one of these trail projects come along and it looks like we need to adjust it, we can still come back and adjust it. Nothing ties us to wait until next January or whatever. I'm open if there's a need there, but to do it just to do it is a bit problematic for me.
The thing I would say on behalf of the police department is, if you go back and look at the total cash for the city as a whole, it's about $80 million. So we have for the city as a whole, we have about 2 years' worth of cash on hand, which means that the police, who have about 2 years' worth of cash on hand, they're not a big outlier. I mean, they're kind of in and when we pulled their percentage down in the past, they were considerably higher than the rest of the city. So pulling them down made sense to get them down to where everybody else is operating. But at this point, I don't know that we've completely taken everything from that, but I mean, at this point, they're about where everybody else is. So at that point, then it's not a matter of, okay, well, police have this huge pile of money that nobody else has. Yeah, they have a bigger amount of money because they're a bigger department. So when you look at the cash, but when you look at it as a percentage of annual expenditures, which I think is what you need to do, because otherwise, how do you compare police that spend $7 million a year to parks that spend, considerably less, or fire that spends considerably less? When you look at it as, I think of this as finance director, for me, this is how much time can I keep writing checks if the revenue stops? So when I talk about 2 years' worth of cash, I mean, that's how I'm looking at it, because, okay, if we have a big recession, how long can we go before we got to lay people off? Worst case scenario, we have zero revenue, we've got 2 years in police. But that's about what we have for the city as a whole, is about 2 years. So they're not a big outlier. I mean, that's the big thing that I would look at.
And
If
we
they
know
were a
that-
big outlier, then you say, oh, well, everybody else is at 2 years on average, and they're at 4.
Right.
Okay, well, then maybe we
Well,
want
and
to.
we know that there's, knock on wood, we're not gonna have a situation where we have no revenue for 2 years.
No, you're not going to go to zero. I mean, that's just, but one thing to consider, because this is a lot of money, and people will ask, like, why are you carrying this much money? One thing to consider is, in government, when we have a recession, we don't have the expenditure reductions that you do have in the private sector. If you're in the private sector and you make widgets, because I was an accounting major, we did a lot of widgets. If you make widgets and there's a recession, okay, your revenue's going to go down because you're going to sell less widgets, but typically your expenditures are going to go down somewhat too, because you're going to not need as many raw materials, you're going to not need as much labor, et cetera, so you're going to have some offset. When you look at us as a government, okay, if we have a recession, our revenues go down like everybody else, but what do we do that we do less of in a recession? The answer is pretty much nothing. I mean, you have a recession, you still need just as many police, you still need just as much firemen, you still need just as much LST. The roads don't stop wearing out because there's a recession. All of the things that we spend money on, it still snows. We still have to do all of those things. So there's really no offset for us. We have a decrease in revenue in a recession, and we still got to spend the money.
I mean, I get it. I mean, I don't have a problem. I'm just trying to build up the 301 account.
I know. I think in my opinion, we address it if we have to.
Yeah.
So you guys okay with the 1.5 from,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
general fund?
Yeah.
Is that, you wanna do that?
Yep, you want me to make a motion then to
Yep.
reduce the 31.5 to 30?
Right.
And take that 1.5% and add it to the general purpose capital expense account. So that one would go from 3.5 to 5.
Second.
All right, so that'll hopefully bring us back in line, and then once we see what the numbers come in with the court project, we'd have a better feel of what additional funds are available in the 301 and how we're gonna pay for that and what we're gonna do. But overall, I mean, we should be pretty happy with the administration and what we were able to do over all these years. Is we have a pretty strong financial sound city, probably one of the best in the state, I would imagine, besides Westlake.
Our cash, I do a comparison to the cash balances of the AAA rated cities in the state, and we're right in with those.
So I mean, we're
Except New Albany. The one that we're not close to is New Albany. Their biggest taxpayer is a guy named Les Wexner, and we don't have that.
But I think we also have to remind ourselves too, we're also one of the lowest tax rates.
Right.
We should be
Yeah, we're
just
one of
as
the lowest
proud of
tax
that
rates on top of
For
that,
what we
so.
do.
So yeah, I think we're doing fantastic, which is great. And we gotta keep it up. And it's not all because of what we do. The department heads work out. I mean, I know we, put pressure on not spending money, but, we get the job done, right?
Right.
So, pretty good. Okay. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So overall, the 5-year budget's finished. We'll vote on that, and we'll vote on the 2025 year budget. And I think we'll just keep plugging forward, right?
And just do remember that we may end up needing an adjustment to the healthcare line midway through 25 based on the dental, but we'll see where we're at.
All right, if there's nothing else, we'll recess, or we're adjourned for council.
Okay.